is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and it's Smackdown time. The Samsung Galaxy S8 and the LG G6. Don't do that at home, boys and girls. Two top Android 2017 flagship phones from South Korea, and they both have their merits. But you know, to sum it up, TLDR, this is the Brad Pitt of phones. This is more like Tom Hardy. We're going to look at him now. So in Smackdowns, people always seem to root for the underdog. You know, when Apple was a struggling company whose innovative little phone changed what a smartphone could be, everybody loved them. Now everybody hates them because they have more money than the GDP of many mid-sized countries. Samsung, you know, they were the underdog. They were fighting Apple, so they were cool. But now Samsung is the huge, huge Android player, and LG, Moto, Sony, and HTC are just struggling to sell enough phones to still make a profit. So now it's cool to kind of hate Samsung. You know me. I don't play any of those games. I'm not a fanboy, and I'm not really particularly brand-centric, other than, you know, I prefer products that are from an established, well-known brand, so you know you're getting a decent product. I like the product that does the best job for me, and I'd like to see you folks get that product too. And you and I have different tastes and needs, so it doesn't mean we even have to agree on it, but that's the premise for this Smackdown as we go on. So to start with, Samsung Galaxy S8 really kills it on paper. The specs are just better than the LG G6s. It's hard to deny that, much as one wants to root for LG, but there are other things to consider besides just specs on paper, benchmarks, that sort of thing. First things up, with the Galaxy S8, you get two size choices. With the LG, there is just one size, the 5.7-inch screen phone. With the Galaxy S8, you get the 5.8-inch screen, and that's the one we're focusing on here for size and pricing sort of parity. The LG is cheaper. But there is a 6.2-inch Galaxy S8 Plus for those who really like it supersized. First, what do they have in common? Quite a bit, actually. They're both widescreen phones with taller aspect ratio than normal. They're both made of glass and metal. They both run Android 7.0 Nougat, and each manufacturer has their own fairly heavy custom overlays and a couple of their own custom applications too. They both have really good cameras, two of the top camera phones on the market. They're both IP68 water and dust resistant. They both have a micro SD card slot and 4 GB of RAM. Quick charging support and wireless charging are standard on both of these. Okay, unless you get the Korean LG G6, which gets a high-quality audio DAC and loses the wireless charging. Gets a little bit weird there. Both support Android Pay. So here's where Samsung pulls ahead on specs and on paper. It has a faster CPU, the Snapdragon 835. That's a newer, faster CPU than what we have in the LG G6. More internal storage, 64 GB is standard versus 32 on the LG G6. Accessories, you have the DeX dock, which kind of turns your Samsung into a computer if you happen to have a spare keyboard, mouse, display. You get the idea. That one, so far, I'm not too bullish on. We haven't seen a really good implementation of something that turns a smartphone into a full-fledged, really useful computer just yet. But there's Samsung's own VR goggles with controller now, and that's kind of fun. I don't know how many people are actually really using VR on their phones, but it's pretty cool. Triple biometrics on the Samsung, fingerprint scanner, iris scanner, and facial recognition scanner. On the Samsung, you have Samsung Pay. LG is working on LG Pay, first out in Korea. We're not sure how it's going to do. Of course, they both have Android Pay, but so far it seems like more people are into Samsung Pay than they are into Android Pay. Samsung gives you AKG earbuds in the box, and they're pretty darn good, too. Close, but they're not quite as good as the Bang & Olufsen earbuds you got with the LG V20, but you don't get any fancy earbuds with the G6. LG fights back with a few good bullet points, though. It's $100 cheaper. That's, you know, if you're buying it outright, certainly that's nice, and it means a little bit lower monthly payment plans there. It has dual rear cameras. I think that's a pretty big thing. These days, smartphone photography is the rage. It's pretty much put the point-and-shoot business out of business. And having both the super wide angle and a normal view lens means a lot more creative photography there. Slightly larger battery, 3,300 milliamp versus 3,000, but you know, that's not a huge difference there. It's the subjective points where the race gets a lot more interesting and perhaps closer depending on your tastes. If successful phones were just about cutting-edge specs and wild new hardware features, then, Jesus, you know, the iPhone just wouldn't be as popular phone as it is. Typically, Apple is not going for cutting-edge features, but they really focus on usability, ergonomics, the things that make the little difference. course, people also like a pretty phone, and that's always helped the iPhone do well. And since Samsung started remodeling the Galaxy line to look as sexy as it does, I think that's really helped them a lot too. And the Galaxy S8 is clearly a phone that's primarily about great looks, with everything else being a modest evolution of either the Galaxy S7 Edge or the Note 7 that preceded it. And that's fine. Like I said, a lot of people really do feel like the phone is a personal fashion statement and status symbol. It's something you have with you. People see on you just as much as they see whatever jewelry or clothing you're using. Now, LG's finally going with that trendy and mature look. No weirdo Friends modules, no more plastic backs. Of course, that plastic back did let them have a removable battery, and with LG letting go of that, it's pretty much the end of the removable battery in any phone anymore. So the LG is a really nice looking glass and metal phone that doesn't take any design chances. You don't get the double curvy screen and all that sort of thing. But you know what? That's part of what the appeal is of the LG G6, because given drop tests that we've seen so far and abuse tests, it looks like the LG G6 is holding up better than the double curve, really front and back, also on the Samsung Galaxy S8. It also gives you straight sides that are easy to grip, easy to pick up, easy to hold onto, so less drops likely to happen there. And it helps offset the slipperiness of the glass front and back, which the LG has every bit as much as the Galaxy S8. Some people like flat phones, like the Galaxy S7 was, and they're bummed there is no flat Galaxy S8. Well, the LG G6 is here to help you and take up the slack. The curves might be pretty, but not everybody likes them in terms of usability. You have edge diffraction and distortion. You can almost count out the little bits of the display that wrap around the edges in terms of how useful they are. I mean, if you're using YouTube and you're watching that great video on how to edit photos like a boss, and the Photoshop menus have wrapped around the top edge, you know what I mean. It's not always ideal, and some people just don't like that. Then there's my pet peeve, which is accidental presses on curved screens. The Galaxy S8 is a lot better than the S7 Edge. S7 Edge drove me totally crazy. I gave up trying to use it as my daily driver. The S8's a lot better, but I have noticed holding it in landscape mode for some reason. I still do get those accidental presses, but not when holding it in standard portrait mode. While we're talking about ergonomics, the fingerprint scanner, ergonomically speaking, is definitely better on the LG G6. Why? Because it's lower down on the phone, so you don't have to have super long fingers just to reach it, and it's not right up top beside the camera lens where you're going to smear your camera lens all the time reaching for the fingerprint scanner. Now for displays, both are widescreen phones. They're the two top widescreen phones on the market right now, are tall if you're holding them in portrait mode. The AMOLED on the Galaxy is simply stunning. If you like AMOLED's bright and vivid colors with those deep inky blacks, you're going to love this one. In fact, it's so intense, so bright, so colorful that I noticed that my pupils were actually, it felt like they were having spasms sometimes. After looking at the phone for a while, I'd look away and it would seem like they just couldn't adjust for a few minutes. Really, pretty amazing. So watch out with the brightness on the phone. The LG G6 has an IPS display that supports HDR, and it's competitive certainly with something like the iPhone, just using the iPhone as an example because that's a high-quality IPS display. But it doesn't have the wow factor of AMOLED. It's partly a matter of taste. Some people really like AMOLED, some people really like IPS. I leave that one up to you. One benefit of AMOLED is it means you can use VR goggles, whether you use Samsung's own goggles. There's Daydream VR out there too. Now, Daydream VR is not compatible with the LG because it has an IPS display. There's that. I'm not really sure if that's a deal breaker since phone VR hasn't been exactly all that. It's not something that people are doing by the millions just yet, but for those of you who do care. In terms of performance, of course, the Samsung is going to be faster. It has the newer, faster CPU. But that said, that the LG G6 is still using what's a very powerful CPU. I don't think anybody is really going to notice the difference in CPU performance between these two. Now, if you're somebody who really holds onto their phone for the full 2 years, maybe at the end of 2 years, you're going to notice when applications become even more demanding. Honestly, with anything that has a Snapdragon 820 or higher, if you feel that one phone is a lot more sluggish than another, it's generally down to software optimizations and whatever skins and added application overlays the manufacturer has added. Both of these do have a heavy UI overlay and a good helping of custom applications and features. Historically, Samsung's has been more of a performance problem, but it's improving with each generation. But generally, people do seem to still find that TouchWiz slows things down a bit more than LG's UI. But then again, you got that Snapdragon 835 in there to combat whatever sluggishness might happen due to all that software. Neither of these manufacturers are really super fast about getting Android OS updates out. If you want that, well, there's obviously Google Pixel phones. Even HTC has been quicker. When it comes to cameras, like I said, these are two of the top camera phones on the market right now. Samsung does a bit better job balancing exposure and is noticeably better in low light than most any camera on the market right now in a phone, including the LG G6. I mean, there's just not a lot of noise or color loss in those really dark photos. It's pretty impressive stuff. Now, LG is no slouch. It's just once in a while, occasionally, probably 2 out of 10 photos, I notice where the light balance isn't as ideal as it could be. LG tends to have slightly warmer, not as warm as the iPhone, but slightly warmer, and Samsung goes with a bit cooler and more saturated. Those are things that can be edited with any mobile photo app to suit you, but still, that's how they roll out of the gate. When it comes to 4K video recording, it's really close between the two of these, and you've got optical image stabilization on board for them both. So, well, I might give a slight preference to the Samsung camera overall. LG pulls ahead because of the dual rear cameras. They give you that secondary lens with a super wide angle, and it just opens up all sorts of creative opportunities, particularly if you're doing like wide landscape shots, you want to capture more of the scene, and it's pretty darn fun. And I think that's something that a lot of people really have enjoyed right now. It is kind of the new thing for phone cameras going forward, and I wish Samsung had done that. Instead, it feels like with Samsung, we got a slightly tweaked and improved version of last year's camera, and that's about it. Lastly, battery life. Even though the LG has a little bit bigger battery, well, this is where it gets a little difficult because, you know what, it really depends. It's going to vary by carrier, having something to do with reception. Poor reception eats more battery life, and also what bloatware they pre-install on the phones, because that can actually use up CPU cycles and hit battery life. With the LG on Verizon, I noticed, in fact, that the software load, just booting up the phone and not running anything, was a lot higher in terms of battery drain in the GSAM battery monitor than it was on the AT&T Samsung Galaxy S8. When we had the unlocked LG G6, the pre-released unit from LG, the battery life was really impressive on that. I mean, approaching 5.5 hours of screen on time. But then the Verizon version is more like 4.5. Huh. Now, Samsung with the Galaxy S8 has a real winner in terms of battery life, and I have been seeing 5.5 to 6 hours of actual screen on time. That means actual use time. Now, there's one caveat there. Samsung ships the phone, this is a little slippery of them, with it set to full HD resolution by default, well, widescreen version of full HD 1080p. So if you up that up to the native QHD Plus resolution, the battery life will drop some, but it's not as hideous as you think. And for those of you who have S8s and your battery life hasn't been good, one thing I have noticed, the ambient light sensor sometimes is a little bit wonky. I had it in a fairly dark room and it was running unusually bright. And then I brought it into a sunny location, and it's somewhat sunny, and it kind of adjusted itself. So keep an eye on your screen brightness. It can make a difference. So there you have it, Samsung Galaxy S8 versus LG G6. I'd be happy to own either one. And like I said, on paper, all the specs and the features, well, the Samsung is going to be the winner clearly, but there's more to phones than specs. There's things like ergonomics, particularly location of the fingerprint scanner, the straight size on the LG G6 that are a little bit easier to hold, to pick up, grab, however you want to say it. And also there's the question of durability, where it seems like our beautiful Samsung phone here may be the more delicate. Oh, and then there's price. It's $100 different too. LG is cheaper. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.